The Agentic Sage quadrant is really people who are managing to change the game or evolve the game, that are growing the game. And that is relatively rare. And so the question of how do we do that? I went through everybody I can find who's changing the game, somebody who's really doing it right. Stephen Covey, M. Scott Peck, our teachers Ron and Mary Holnick at the University of Santa Monica. How did they do it?
Brian Whetten is a former Silicon Valley entrepreneur turned executive coach who spent the past 25 years reverse engineering what separates the rare few who operate with a high level of agency and a high level of consciousness. Most people get stuck in one of three quadrants: playing the game, winning the game, or escaping the game. But there's a fourth path that almost no one finds. In this conversation, Brian shares how leaders can break through the wall to unite power, consciousness, and integrity to create lasting value and meaning.
Leadership is the capacity to turn power into value. It's the ability to take the power you have, however much power you have, and turn it into value that makes the system better. If you have 1,000 gallons of leadership and 500 gallons of power, you're underutilized, but you're safe. If you have 1,000 gallons of power and 500 gallons of leadership, you're dangerous to yourself and others. Wealth is a form of power. So is consciousness. So those two dimensions are actually two dimensions of power. Power without leadership creates pride.
But along this journey, Brian shares how we'll inevitably come up against a wall.
When I had my first burnout, I wasn't trying to fix me, I was trying to get to my goal. So this critical distinction, it's when we try to push against the wall, it pushes back. And the question is, how do you get pulled through the wall? And what pulls us through the wall are yes as hell no goals, plus the support to help address all of the deep, dark, horrible stuff, the holes inside, as we do it.
What if our problem isn't the wall, but our level of leadership?
You don't get rid of the wall. The wall's always there. How do you grow yourself so that the wall moves and you can experience more abundance, more impact in the world, more meaning, more money, all good things? The first key is proving worth versus providing value.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Brian, what's up, man? It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for probably about 6 weeks. So I'm so excited this day is here. And maybe just as a little bit of a background, what connected us was this image of a graph that basically showed an axis. There you go. You got it right there. An axis of agency versus consciousness, right? And it was, I think I first saw this from our mutual friend, Tom Morgan. And both of us have spent a good chunk of our own journey trying to navigate that path of combining, not just being a monk in the mountains, not just being a hustle bro that is getting a lot done, but doing it from a place of low consciousness. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are exploring this. And so I think today I want to talk about that journey to that top right quadrant of high agency and high consciousness, which has been branded as Agentic Sage in the original image. And that's the exploration for today. And I'm excited to talk about this with you. I actually have this image and I know a lot of people are on YouTube watching this. So I'm just going to do a quick screen share so people can just know what we're talking about. So this is our lovely high consciousness, high agency image that connected us.
Yep. And you drew the red line and posted that. I was like, yes, that's it. That's the problem. Is why is it so hard to get to that upper right? And that was the conversation you and I have been in for a couple months now.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And I have my own thoughts on this and my own experience. I mean, it really has been a 7-year journey for me of navigating that. But I'd like to hear from you. Why the heck why? Let's just frame it up. Like, why do we think this is hard in the first place?
Well, actually, so let me do as my story then, because I've followed this path over. Today I turned 55 years old today.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. So I've been on that red line, and I started as a nerd in the Midwest cornfields of Illinois. Just trying to get ahead and climb the ladder and figure out why all the pretty girls didn't want to date me, and what do I need to do to fix that, and climbed overachiever mountain to that agentic fool stage where Silicon Valley, Berkeley PhD, 2 full burnouts by 30, and that 2 full burnouts by 30 would be the fool, the agentic fool piece of it. Just hitting my head against the wall over and over again. And then with my second burnout, I'm like, okay, I need to learn something here, and ended up doing 6 years of full-time personal spiritual development work. And coming out of that, of like, okay, I found the secrets of life. I need to share them with everyone. I am here to raise the consciousness of the planet. And found it insanely more difficult than I ever would have expected. And so even from that upper left quadrant, trying to get to the right to actually build a coaching practice that made money and meaning with integrity, trying to help other people do that, was an incredible. It's 20 years now since I started my coaching practice full-time professionally. And my wife and I, Nicole, and I spent 15 years of that teaching what we most need to learn, which is how do you build a coaching practice with full integrity? And really hard. We figured it out, but we codified it to such a level that we could just like, here you go, here's the step-by-step instructions. But people couldn't follow the instructions without doing some tremendous level of inner work. And so that was my experience for me. It was the experience for the hundreds or thousands of people we've coached along the way. There's just this really deep wall that I want to talk about. What's the wall? Why is it so hard? Why do we just keep hitting our heads against it over and over again? Why does it seem to happen for everybody? And how do we work through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. And where my mind goes is like, is there even an option to go around the wall? And this really gets into, what do you believe about reality and the purpose and what it is? And I have freaking tried to go around the wall and not go through this stuff, and life just doesn't let me, And so I think this is like
quantum mechanics level, gravity level physics. This isn't wish my way across the wall. No, this is, why do balls roll downhill?
I agree. So what is your opinion of kind of the journey and why that wall exists?
Yep. So I pulled some slides together. Let me walk through a few of these and in getting to that. So you read Yes, SL No. And in that book, I described the same picture in a slightly different way. I'm going to try to describe the picture a few different ways here. The one we started with, the 4 quadrants. So I talked about 2 dimensions of life. There's the ladder of consciousness and the road to success. Okay. And those are agency, which is the road to success, versus consciousness or awareness. Right. And like, I know you love David Hawkins, for example. That's a great map of consciousness. Ken Wilber has mapped some passive consciousness. So a lot of people trying to find, what does that ladder look like? How do we measure it? And so it's clear, like, that's one dimension. And then there's the more materialistic dimension. And the original picture we started with could sound a little bit technical or arrogant with some of the labels that was put on it. I was talking with Nicole about this, and she's like, honey, slow it down. Let's speak language that works for people. And so she actually suggested relabeling the 4 boxes. The first one is playing the game. How do you play the game? How do you just do what you're told, be your part in society, climb the mountain, good grades? Then at some point you become, hopefully, relatively small people get here, to the place where it feels like you're winning the game. right? And both you and I have had enough experiences of raising money and doing crazy things. We've had tastes of what it's like to win the game. And then what usually happens is that red line turns and you're starting to try to go up, but you go left. And we end up finding different ways of escaping the game. And it actually, that spiritual bypass is a lifting off the planet and waking up to more of what's really true, but in a way that somehow loses a lot of our agency and our power in the world. And so again, what is that? Why do we go from winning the game to escaping the game? And then the agentic sage quadrant is really people who are managing to change the game or evolve the game, that are growing the game. And that is relatively rare. And so the question of how do we do that? And I spent 25 years now reverse engineering the industry, right? You name it. I've tried it, read it, studied it, apprenticed under it, trying to figure out not just what works, but why does it work? Okay. And so we're going to distill that 25 years here into a few core things of like, okay, I went through and I said, okay, everybody I can find who's changing the game, somebody who's really doing it right. Stephen Covey, M. Scott Peck, our teachers, Ron and Mary Holnick at the University of Santa Monica, a long list of people that were role models for Nicole and I. How did they do it?
And, I also want to underscore, because there's a lot of people out there that are like, well, who's changing the game? They're going to point to Bezos. They're going to point to Musk. They're going to point to people that are kind of operating on the material plane. But you and your coaching work, I mean, I've heard you talk about people that are getting 10 to 100x results of everybody else in their field. And these people aren't spiritual teachers or wisdom teachers like you just described. So I want to make sure that this changing the game applies not just to people in spiritual land, but also professionals who are kicking ass at whatever they're doing in their field.
And that's a great point, because that's actually the other set of reverse engineering I've been doing. Was I started with, or we, Nicole and I, started with all of the more spiritual side of things, but then in our coaching, we stumbled by accident into clients that were already changing the game in that upper right quadrant without really having figured out how they were doing it or really owning that that's what they were doing. They just were doing what they did and doing it way, way, way better than anybody else in their field. And not in like crazy technology space where, it's easy, relatively speaking, to make $1 billion with a new idea and running real hard. We're doing commoditized industries. So one in water bottles and made hundreds of millions of dollars for himself. One in self-made billionaire in toys for children. Another in retail redevelopment, taking oftentimes inner city projects and redeveloping them and doing it in a way that people just can't understand how they managed to pull it off. And so over and over again, I found these very successful entrepreneurs who aren't seeking the limelight. You're never going to hear them, jumping up and down on Twitter and proclaiming how great they are. They're just quietly creating value, but they're doing it in that upper right quadrant. And so again, how did they get there? And that's what some of the things I want to tease apart today.
I love that. And, just to make this concrete, because I think you brought up a really good point where as you move from that bottom right quadrant of high agency to starting to get on an awareness path, I just wanted to describe a little bit what that can feel like, because it's very frustrating. I remember there were years where, I was just always super dialed in person, right? Completely optimized. And then I found myself on a spiritual path, and there were days where I couldn't send an email. There were experiences where I was like, I can't do basic things. It feels like I'm in sludge. And it was so confusing to me. And I mean, it was befuddling. And I'm talking multiple years of that. And if you haven't really gone through that can sound pretty off, but I mean, it just seems like almost like a rite of passage to varying degrees that people have to go through as they make this kind of jump from quadrant to quadrant.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've would just share that I find so interesting about your work is that you seem to try to minimize that, what that feeling is like for people that are already agentic, to go to the top right without having to go become a monk or take a year-long spiritual sabbatical or just slog through the mud on their own and try ask themselves every day why the hell life has gotten so hard.
Yep. That is the core of what we've developed a certain level of competency in the hard way, with a lot of pain and suffering and trial and error and failure over 25 years, where we found fairly reliable pathways through the wall. And particularly for high agentic, successful people to move up in consciousness without having to become a monk. Yes. So it is possible. And again, let's tease apart that. But before we jump to the solutions, we got to really understand the diagnosis. We have to really get the wall and what it is and why it's there, before we can talk about how to move through it. So let's go to the 3 examples from your group, from Founder Satsang. We were talking about like the conscious entrepreneurs, spiritually aware coaches, and then really high net worth entrepreneurs who've won the game to the level of like financial independence or even generational wealth. And I think those are just 3 fantastic examples of like looking at the wall from different directions. So like if we start with conscious entrepreneurs, the way that like it seems like if we add more consciousness to our business, that should make things easier and more successful. And yet most of the time it makes things harder, more dramatic, way more emotional, and less successful. What are some of the patterns you've seen of that, for yourself?
Definitely. Well, I think that there's a tendency for a founder to have a spiritual awakening or going on an ayahuasca trip or something like that, and come back and, to your point, like be like, I got the answers, right? And all of a sudden we're going to start meetings by connecting our hearts, and everyone around them is kind of like, what the hell are we doing? Right? This isn't what I signed up for. And so I think that there's absolutely a pattern of trying to like insert your consciousness into a container that has not opted into that, and that being very disorienting and confusing for the people around them who signed up for something else. What I've also seen is, and I was having a conversation with my friend Tracy recently, who started a company called Choose. It was a Silicon Valley catering company, grew to 300 people. She was in the middle of her journey while on it. And she found that all of a sudden managers had to become therapists, right? By integrating, like they had like a red, yellow, green spotlight of like, how are you feeling? And people start talking more about their feelings, and it was like, oh, this is going to be great. And then all of a sudden it was like everything became about feelings instead of performance. And that it was like, well, we've shifted to feelings over performance. And again, how do we do both? And so those are two of the main things that I've seen with this that can be quite challenging.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, just if you keep going, if you spend any time like in the social enterprise space, people are basically trying to take nonprofits but do it in a for-profity way. So they're really integrating money and meaning. Those are some of the most dysfunctional, highly dramatic, emotionally charged organizations I've ever seen most of the time. So even when you get a group of people who have buy-in and they want to play the game at a higher consciousness level, they still hit the wall. And so again, it's like this gravity thing of like, there's so much talk and effort that's been made in the last 10, 20 years around conscious entrepreneurship, conscious business. How do we do purpose-driven business? How do we do money and meaning? I'm there, right? I'm 25 years in that question. And yet, man, it is hard at first. And the naive approaches just tend to backfire spectacularly.
Yeah. And I think one of the big challenges is there's not a shared definition of what consciousness is, right? I think, to just be very blunt, like there's someone like me that's like, oh, this is about self-realization. It's about opening the heart. And then there's somebody else at a company that thinks it's about DEI. There's somebody else at a company that thinks it's about saving plastic bottles out of the ocean, right? There's just like all of these different definitions, and that makes things incredibly messy.
It does. So even if you strip it back, so just to go that and take it even further. So we define spirituality and meaning as synonyms. So if something is meaningful, it's spiritual. If it's spiritual, it's meaningful. And so that consciousness axis, one of the most reliable measurements of that axis is in meaning and purpose. And so as you bring in purpose and profits together, money and meaning, right? That's another way of drawing those two axes, the ladder of consciousness and the road to success. And again, even if we get everybody on the same page with the same purpose, trying to integrate purpose up and profits right causes all hell to break loose reliably.
Why do you think that is?
So again, we're going to get to it. Let's do another example first, which is taking that same problem from another direction, which is the spiritually aligned coaches.
And I would expand this to just say spiritually aligned builders and business owners. And what I've seen with that group is someone goes on a spiritual journey, all of a sudden it becomes incredibly hard to be inauthentic and to just do things as a means to an end. So for example, when I was in Agentic Fool Land hustling, it was like, oh, I'm just going to write stuff for the algorithm, right? And I'm going to get followers and I'm going to grow and I'm going to do whatever it takes to win, right? And you get rewarded, right? Like it works. And then all of a sudden you have all these, whether it's a coach or someone selling some type of new product, they're like, okay, we need to get clients. Like we need to market ourselves. We need to go online and start building an audience. And there's just like an ickiness now to just doing things that just as a means to an end, especially when it's out of integrity.
Yes.
I remember for a good year or two, I couldn't even go on X because I'm like, this entire platform is a giant performance of people writing threads about shit that doesn't matter, about how Steve Jobs grew up or whatever, to just try to get followers. And this just doesn't resonate at all, right? But you're seeing all those people building a big business and making money and succeeding. And so you're in this kind of question of like, how do I do this without being a douche?
Right.
Like
totally.
How do I do this while being in integrity and not feeling the ick to grow my business?
Yep. So spiritually aligned coaches, spiritually aware builders, coaches, counselors, healers, whatever we're talking about, whatever form. When you try to add money to that consciousness, like marketing feels icky because it has to be about inauthentic self-promotion in order to make money. And that feels antithetical to who you are and what you're trying to do. When you get to selling clients, everything I learned about selling was the opposite of what worked in coaching. And I had to unlearn, everything I knew from Silicon Valley and completely reinvent it because everything was based on manipulation. How do you close the deal? Right. And if you look, I coached quite a few of the leaders in the coaching and self-help space over the years in different ways, got to see behind the curtains. And a dirty secret is that most of the people, not all, but most of the quote unquote leaders in the space who appear to have a huge following and making a ton of money, like a typical scenario is they're grossing $600,000-$700,000 a year, but they're netting like 150, and they're working 90 hours a week. Okay, because they're having to just grind so hard and their expenses are so much because they're having to feed this marketing engine and their team and everything, and they're having to do all this stuff that feels inauthentic. And I found very few people who actually were winning that game that actually felt good about it.
Yeah, I think it's really sobering and important for people to hear because that's not what they see, right?
Right.
They just see like, wow, this person is crushing it across all levels. And
Yep.
I know someone who worked for one of the top YouTubers in spirituality or whatever, and the guy was a business guy, and then he became this spiritual teacher. And he'll be the first one to say, like, yeah, he spent $1.5 million on the media team to get there,
Right.
and now he's there, but like he had to spend all that money, and like his actual take home is not that much. Let's talk about bringing your whole self to work. If you're like many executives, including myself at one point, you might be living a double life. You have your personal career, and then you have your personal growth journey. Conscious Talent is changing that as the world's first executive talent firm specializing in connecting leaders and companies who embrace inner work. Imagine finding job opportunities where your contemplative practice, latest retreat experience, and commitment to your personal evolution are seen as strengths, not secrets? What if you actually felt like your career supported this aspect of your life versus competed with it? Conscious Talent is building a community of leaders and companies who are committed to both combining professional excellence with personal transformation. If you're ready to merge your two worlds with a fully aligned career, join the movement at conscioustalent.com. Here you can sign up for our talent collective to stay on top of future opportunities or find your next transformative team member.
Yes, that's it. So this path of self-promotion is the standard one that shows up in that coaching, the spiritually aligned group that wants to move into agentic stage. And it doesn't work well. Okay. So again, there's the wall. We've got the conscious entrepreneurs who are trying to get there from below. We've got the spiritually aware coaches and builders that are trying to get there from the side. And then the third group I want to talk about, because it's showing up more and more in my world. And I know, like with your founder saying, it sounds like you're starting to have more of these people. And with Silicon Valley and just the sheer quantity of wealth that's been created, I'm spending more and more time with people who've won the game to such a level that they never need to work again, and oftentimes their kids are never going to have to work again, and possibly their grandkids are never going to have to work again. And what do you do with that? And all of a sudden, what's the meaning of my life? If I've sold my company for $500 million, and what's the meaning of my kids' lives going to be if they don't really need to make money? And it's a really deep problem. And I've seen very few people, very few families as role models that have figured this one out. Instead, what you get is the first generation will muddle through and they'll be okay. The kids will, often be spoiled, insecure, and then the grandkids just go all to hell. I've got a couple friends, category people right now that are dealing with that, and like dealing with their grandkids, and it's ugly, and it's, again, seems really structural. It's not that they were bad people. It's not that they were bad parents. They won the game in so many ways. They have good hearts. They were trying to do everything right. And yet somehow they've completely screwed up their grandkids. And how did that happen? And how do we fix that? Or they're sitting on a bunch of money and themselves, and they're trying to figure, well, what do I do next? What's the meaning of the rest of my life going to be?
Right. And I've heard you talk about, and I'm in this this group called Post-Exit Founders. It's for exited entrepreneurs, and it's a lot of this, and a lot of people talking about fancy vacations and let's go to Aspen and all the shit that's just eventually going to get old. Or a lot of people that are focused on going bigger, right? And I've heard you talk about this. It's like, all right, well, the only other answer is to just go bigger. And now instead of money, I'm going to focus on impact, right? And I'm going to have the biggest impact in the room. And that becomes the kind of new thing. And then I would say there are people that they reach that to the M. Scott Peck thing about winning. They reached it, they won, they realized that winning in that dimension wasn't actually winning. And then that opens them up to the consciousness path. And that's, they're like, okay, I think I've been playing the wrong game actually, and it's time to open up to potentially a new game.
Yep. So I'm going to flash forward. I talk about two types of problems of lack and problems of excess. And our society is extremely aware of problems of lack. We have almost no awareness in our current society of problems of excess and how to work with them. And so at its heart, problems of lack come from places where your wealth is less than your needs. You have a certain set of needs for you and your family. You need to feed the kids. You need to, not starve, keep the bandits away, things like that. And we, as a race, have spent hundreds of thousands of years suffering in the face of problems of lack. But in our society today, it's much more likely you're going to die of suicide than being murdered. It's more likely that you're going to die of obesity rather than starvation, right? Almost everything is, you've got too much time and too much entertainment and too much information coming in not enough. And so problems of excess at its core happen when your wealth is greater than your ability to turn that wealth into value. So the rich exited founders, they're sitting on a huge pile of wealth. And now what do you do with that wealth? How do you use that wealth to create value in the world for yourself, for your kids, for other people, right? And it's a deep question. And if it's done just in a pure egoic way, well, I'm going to be the impact king now, that doesn't seem to work well, right? But if you don't deal with the question honestly, you just get run over. Your life falls apart. I've got one of the entrepreneurs that's a client of mine, beautiful home on the beach in Southern California, and his neighbor is second generation, uh, deep alcoholic, just sits there, drinks himself to death a little bit at a time each day, sitting in his $20 million mansion on the beach. So life is really hard at a very, very deep level when at an almost spiritual level we start becoming takers, where we're consuming more than we're creating. And wealth is a form of power, and we're responsible for our power. The more power you have, the more responsibility you have to use that power wisely, which means creating value in some way.
I don't want to derail this conversation, but I do want to just put a pin on this where I really am excited to hear you talk about the relationship between higher consciousness and power.
Yes,
and the reason is because the way that a lot of people think of power, right? They think of Elon, they think of Bezos, they think of the guy who can just, okay, I'm going to hire somebody to do this, bing, bam, boom, bomb, right? And have the resources to do that. And they don't think of the person running the Santa Monica Spiritual Institute, right?
Yep.
They don't think of the woman that can use her own consciousness to shift someone's energetic state with a thought. And so, I just think that definition and that relationship.
It's awesome.
Cool.
Okay, let's go. Well, we're gonna loop around to wherever we go because we'll hit it all. All right. Power is one of the hardest words to speak about cleanly. Okay, it's not like consciousness is confusing as a word, but power is ugly in a certain way. Like people just avoid wanting to talk about it. Power is scary to even allow into the room. And particularly right now with the ridiculous, crazy left woke, well, power means oppression. If you have power, you're an oppressor by definition. Okay, that's bordering on evil. That statement, like that gets me so angry at a visceral level. I'm not an angry person, but M. Scott Peck defined evil as militant ignorance, and defining power as always being abusive and oppressive, that's militant ignorance. Like that pisses me off deeply. Okay, that's a path to hell.
Well, it's funny because I was like, so I guess Jesus was a pretty evil dude. That guy had power, right? And many of the great healers and people that have changed things for the positive have.
That's it.
Essentially, by definition, and they kind of had to have that.
They have to. So power is morally neutral. Power is the capacity to do something, to change something, to influence something. It can be used to create value, or it can be used to destroy value. In its most naive use, we tend to use power to take care of our needs at the expense of other people. We ignore the externalities of power, right? And a lot of what's going on right now, the good news about woke and crazy left is it's bringing more awareness to externalities, right? Global warming is a conversation in its better days about the externalities of energy use and what that does to the planet. Great, let's talk about that. Fair trade practices, other things that allow us to talk about, well, how do we create value, not just for us or just for my business, but for society as a whole? Okay, so value in its purest sense lifts the whole system. It doesn't just lift you. Okay, so power is morally neutral. It can be used to create value for the system, or it can be used to destroy value in the system. Often by making you a little bit better for the moment, but making the system worse. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So The misuse of power, and every spiritual teacher has talked about this in different ways, as well as the humanities and the classics and the Greeks and the Romans and hubris. And this is root, right? This is one of those E equals MC squared things. If you misuse power in ways that destroys value in the system, makes the world worse rather than better, it creates a soul level hole, a soul level insecurity inside of you. Okay. The Eastern traditions call this karma. Western traditions, I don't know, it's not as quite as nuanced. But it would be sin, would be the basic category of misuse of power, right? So whether it's called sin or karma, we're misusing power. And when we do that, we hurt ourselves at a soul level. There's this hole that opens up inside. And the hole can never be filled. It's this never enough, never enough, never enough, never enough energy. Okay. That comes at its core with, it doesn't matter intention. You can have the best intentions, or maybe intention probably helps, but it's not enough. Good intention is not enough. What matters is, can you use power responsibly to turn power into value for the system as a whole? Starting with yourself, because you matter. You're part of the system. It's not self-sacrifice. Okay. But the pain of failing to create value is so deep that it's very, very hard to look at honestly. And so what we do at a automatic, unconscious, psychological level is we cover it up. We hide from our sins. We hide from our karma. We pretend that it didn't happen. We blame somebody else. It was her fault. She did it. Okay. But you can't hide from the hole inside. It just doesn't work. Okay. So pride is another big, dirty, nasty word. Pride is the arrogance of insecurity masquerading as confidence. Okay. Pride is pretending you've got it together and there's no hole inside when there's a hole inside that can't be filled. Well, it can be filled, but you're not until you own it and look at it and work with it. You have to heal the hole inside, which at root, it comes from the places where we failed to use our power wisely. Does that make sense?
It does. And it has me thinking about this wall.
Yep. That's it.
Because it's like, what is the solution? Like the wall and the holes inside are essentially the same.
Yes.
Or intimately related, I would say.
Yes, that's it. Intimately related. You got it. Okay. So leadership we define as in different ways. But the version I'll use for right now is leadership is the capacity to turn power into value. Okay. It's the ability to take the power you have, however much power you have, and turn it into value that makes the system better. Okay. If you have 1,000 gallons of leadership and 500 gallons of power, you're underutilized, but you're safe. If you have 1,000 gallons of power and 500 gallons of leadership, you're dangerous to yourself and others. Wealth is a form of power, so is consciousness. So those two dimensions are actually two dimensions of power.
Okay? I can see it. Yeah, nice.
The ladder of consciousness, the road to success, awareness and agency, consciousness and success, whatever we define it as. Okay. As we acquire more power on both dimensions, we move forward, and the wall is our current level of leadership, which is the capacity to turn that power into value. Power without leadership creates pride. I've got a picture here of this somewhere.
So can we maybe just ground this into, so we're defining the wall as the level of leadership and leadership as the ability to turn capacity into value or power into value.
Power into value, yep.
And so I'm just thinking about the person who's starting a new business and looking at posting on social media and being like, I literally can't do this. Like, how does that relate? And then hearing like, well, that's because you don't have the level of leadership. And them that just being a little bit confusing, or like, well, how the hell does this being hard relate to my level of leadership?
So notice, so a new entrepreneur has usually, so myself, Silicon Valley. I started my company in '95 out of my dorm room at Berkeley, working on my PhD, and I raised money from A-tier VCs. I was one of the first of that generation to do so, and I was effing clueless. I had no power and I had no leadership. Okay, I'm just a kid with a bit of technology and an idea. Now, at some point, I raised real money. 10 million for the first company and another 10 for the company that acquired us, which back then was real money. Now it's like pre-seed something. It's sort of silly, but the point was that money was power, right? So investors trusted me enough to give me power, and then my job was to turn it into value. That's when I needed leadership, which was the capacity to turn the power into value. But if somebody doesn't have investment yet, their first problem is they don't have enough power. So oftentimes we're dealing with both problems. I need more power and I need more leadership. But again, if you have lots of power, which could be either consciousness and spiritual awareness, or money, or other forms of material power, if you have lots of power and not a lot of leadership, that by definition creates abuse or waste or corruption.
Yeah, I think this is clarifying, just like making sure that the consciousness stuff is included in the power definition, because
Yes.
for me, just to be really clear about that example, when I was viewing everything through this polarity of good and bad with activities I used to do, I didn't have the consciousness or the awareness to see that I was creating this artificial limitation and wall around an activity that was making it so hard to do, right?
Yes.
And so I didn't have I didn't have the consciousness power to see how I was getting in my own way.
Yes.
And that's it's not really related to my bank account, but this is where that wall was showing up, the consciousness power.
Absolutely. And if we go to Hawkins, power versus force, okay, one of his fundamental claims, and I think it's deep truth, is that every level of consciousness comes with more power. Someone who is in more consciousness starts experiencing synchronicities. The world responds to them.
That's right.
Okay. So the more consciousness you have, the more you warp reality around you. Like Steve Jobs in his reality distortion field. We all do that. We all have reality distortion fields. We're all dancing with the universe proportional to our consciousness.
Agreed.
Okay. So power is consciousness, power is wealth and other forms of material power. The goal of life, the entire meaning and purpose of life, if we distill it down to one picture, is to make the future better, which is how we define value creation. This is the definition of coaching. Where are you at? Where do you want to be? What's in the way? It's the definition of leadership. Leaders create a better tomorrow. Coaches help leaders create a better tomorrow. It's two sides of the same thing. Okay. So our goal in life is to turn power into value for the system, not just for ourselves, but to make the system better, right? Killing someone and stealing their money so that I have money is not value creating. Right? We've hopefully figured that out for most of us by now, but it took us a while. Right. So as we push against the wall, we experience pride. We loop out in either spiritual bypass and spiritual pride. Spiritual bypass is a form of insecurity and arrogance. It's a form of pride. It's I am so consciousness, the rules of gravity don't apply to me. I'm going to meditate my way to a Ferrari. I'm so consciousness, I'm escaping samsara. See ya, suckers.
Or one of my favorites. Oh, I've already had that lesson.
Yes. I got that one done.
Yep. I know that one pretty well.
Yep. Okay. So the more power we have, as it's a self-protective thing. The wall is actually a gift from the universe supporting us in diffusing our power in situations where we don't have enough leadership. It's like speed bumps on the road or moguls on a double black diamond. So ways of slowing yourself down. Pride isn't evil, it's not bad, it's breaking. So pride is inherently inefficient, it's stupid. The book I'm working on, Curing Stupidity, at its heart is about inefficiency in the ways that we waste power. We do things that are opposite of what we want. I think I'm going this way and I end up going the other direction instead. Pride is a primary form of that.
Just to build on this, I think we're talking about this wall, right? And it seems like at the onset, like a very bad thing. Like, God damn it. Like, why can't I just be an agentic sage? Like, but the reality is that it is benevolent, to your point, because it's right there and it's not moving until you reach that next rung of awareness and freedom.
That's it. So, and again, it's not awareness and freedom, not quite. Awareness and freedom is actually power. It's not until you develop the capacity to hold the power you've been given. Did you read Michael Singer's The Surrender Experiment?
Oh, yeah. Very formative in my journey.
Great. Phenomenal book until I love that book. And then I wanted to throw it against the wall in the last quarter. I was so effing pissed at him because he took a deep truth story arc and then he took a failure of leadership. He was given more and more power by the universe, and he failed to use his power properly in the late 90s. He allowed round tripping of revenue, which is a big no-no with the SEC. Whether he knew it was happening, didn't know, doesn't matter. It was a failure on his watch. And then he turned it into a victim story about how all of these evil people came after him, even though he was the good guy. No, you were given more and more power until you got to the place where your power was higher than your leadership. You screwed up. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But you didn't own the failure.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I was pissed at him because I'm like, so this was a really fun read. Am I just supposed to say yes to everything? It was very impractical in terms of how do you actually implement surrender in your day-to-day experience?
Absolutely. And again, he had a lot of things behind the scenes of ways he grew his leadership as he went. And that was most of the first half of the book was him saying yes to things. And we're actually going to come back to grounding this in a little bit. Like how do we make this principle more real? Right. But let's put a pin in that one for now. Okay, so let's stay with power. Okay, so power creates pride. But it's not the power that creates pride, it's excess power. So this is why if you have too much wealth and you hand it to your kids and your grandkids, they haven't developed the leadership to be wise stewards of that much power. And so they waste it. They fritter it away, or they become alcoholics, or they become miserable, or they ruin their grandkids, that because they don't have enough leadership for what they've been given. We're one of our friends is one of the Vanderbilt children, grandchildren, and their family has the world record for destroyed wealth in 3 generations, and so he was actually raised without a lot of money, but with the name. And he says, all right, I'm going to do something with that. And he climbed the mountain and has done very well with integrity. I have tremendous respect for him in many ways because he did it in spite of what he'd been given. Right? He'd been in some ways handicapped by his history. But he went there and he climbed the mountain. His cousin Anderson Cooper of CNN, same family. So you do the rags to rags, and then back to riches, and then to rags and riches, because we haven't figured out that it's not wealth that we need by itself. It's the capacity, the leadership to turn the different forms of wealth and power into value creation.
Yeah. And I think, the $1 million question that I think a lot of us have is, well, how the heck do we do that?
Yes. Okay, so power minus leadership equals pride. And pride is insecurity. It's arrogance masquerading as confidence. Okay, it's not real. Okay, so we've talked about, and we were going to talk about money and meaning. So let's just hit that while we're there. So there's two types of wealth. There's many types of wealth, but just these two dimensions. Power and wealth are somewhat synonymous. So consciousness or meaning or purpose is one axis. Spirituality and meaning are synonymous. Money is the simplest way of denominating materialistic success or power or wealth. Okay. And the problem is if you have wealth without enough leadership, you create this hole inside, and there's this never enough addiction. Never enough, never enough. I need more money. There was one of the Disney heiresses became aware of this and has really grappled with this. And she went around and interviewed other trust fund babies in her circles. And she asked them a question. Says, how much money do you need for it to be enough? And whether they had 10 million or 10 billion, the answer was almost always the same, which is twice as much as I have now.
Fascinating.
Fascinating. Okay. So there's this never enough hole that starts up when we try to push past the wall rather than honor it.
Yeah. I mean, what I find interesting is that the pride, it's like you're using the outside versus going direct to the insecurity.
Yes, that's it. You're trying to cover over the insecurity rather than heal it directly.
And what I've noticed in my own journey, which is it's, you know, it's kind of like life organized itself so that the money didn't come until the healing happened.
Yes.
In a bigger way, right?
That's
because out of benevolence, right? Because it was like, hey, dude, like this is what you actually want, which is to feel good more often than not, right?
Yeah.
To feel good all the time and to be free and to truly be free, right? You know, it was almost like for my particular soul's journey, it just said, hey, we're not going to give you the money.
That's it.
Out of the get-go.
That's it. So that red line that you drew is the benevolent universe supporting us. Okay. And I do a lot with stages of development, right? Spiral dynamics and Wilbur translated into 100 different ways and simplified in different perspectives. But if we shrink it down like this, the fundamental model Nicole and I work with over and over again, and it's, red through yellow, turquoise in spiral dynamics model, but taking, pleasing, achieving, giving, and receiving. And if we bring in M. Scott Peck, it's lose-lose, war, versus lose-win, which is self-sacrifice. I'm going to lose so that society wins. I'm going to sacrifice my needs to be a good, religious, humble person and do my role in society, even if that hurts me. But that's much better than being an out-of-control gang member. Okay, we learn how to become civilized. And then we go from civilization, which requires self-sacrifice, up to competition. Let's create a game called capitalism where we all play win-lose, and somehow it creates value with the magic of the marketplace. And then we go to giving, which is trying to play win-win, mutual care. And a core theme here is that this isn't stable in business. This works or this works. This works in family, but it doesn't work in business. I'll talk about a little bit more on why. And so you have to get up to here in order to have stability. Okay. So now if we take that back to our picture of the two axes, right? We start with taking, then we become an NPC is really a pleaser, somebody who's just doing what they're meeting expectations. Most job reviews in companies are based on did you meet or exceed expectations? That's pleasing 101. Then you have people actually set goals and try to accomplish their goals. That's achieving. That's playing the game hard, trying to win the game. And then at some point you've won Success Mountain enough and you try to go up, but you have to go over to the right because that's the next stage. Right? It's a natural progression. And then if you keep going, hopefully at some point you get to receiving. But this is a big ass deal. And I spent a lot of time like in the Ken Wilber community, and there was a profound level of arrogance that grew in our community and spiritual pride, thinking that just, oh, because we see the pattern and we can look back and see the ladder in this way. Well, clearly that means that we're at the top and we're all agentic sages and we're so much superior to everybody else and blah, 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 blah. Like it was just, oh my God, spiritual pride on steroids.
It's funny because when my friend Peter Corbett, who is, he might be an agentic sage. He had like a big time exit. He's spent a tremendous amount of time in his Zen practice. Very, very awesome dude. But we were joking about like, I think a lot of people, when they sign up for the spiritual journey, they're like, oh, this is awesome. I'm just going to be happier. And for me, I just want to be like, prepare to have your shit kicked in,
Yes.
for a long time. And
Yes.
it's still happening to me a lot.
Yes.
And the agency is increasing, but the refinement of the mirror polishing does not slow down.
So this core distinction that I work with over and over and over again for myself and everyone who will listen is this notion between awareness and development. Spiritual awareness versus integrated spiritual development. Spiritual awareness is a ladder we can climb. Spiritual development is the hero's journey, and it always, always, always looks like this. That hole inside has to be healed for you to be integrated. So you have to move the wall forward, you have to grow your capacity to use power wisely, and you have to heal some piece of the hole inside. That is the archetypal hero's journey. That's the 12 steps from Vogler. That's every character arc is some version of that path. We have to confront the darkness inside, which takes tremendous courage in order to handle more power with integrity.
One of the things that I loved that you said in your book is that spirituality is a practice of continuously taking leaps of faith and basically falling and practicing being caught.
Yes.
Like that metaphor just hit so well because it's so true, dude. And I encounter this all the time. Like I just did a podcast with this like ex NFL guy, super tough guy, like 6'5", 335 pounds, whatever. And we were just joking about like, for him, it was like, yeah, man, that NFL stuff was actually a cakewalk. And like, I was thinking about me, it's like when I was just like crushing business, like that was actually a cakewalk. Like
Yes.
Facing your deepest insecurities and wounds, just being in the silence with an open inquiry and not knowing what's going to show up, right? Like that stuff is scary as shit.
Yes.
And that's the real leap of faith and being caught over and over and over again.
So let's unpack that. So this now segues perfectly into, I pulled out 3 keys. There's not just 3 keys, there's hundreds of keys, but 3 of the biggest keys of how do you move the wall forward. Okay. You don't get rid of the wall. The wall is always there. The wall is a gift from the universe. It's there to slow you down when you're trying to move too fast, when you have too much power for the leadership that you currently hold. But how do you grow yourself so that the wall moves and you can experience more abundance, more impact in the world, more meaning, more money, all good things? The first key is something I work with over and over and over again. We could spend 10 years on this. There's so many nuances and layers to this, which is proving worth versus providing value. So when we're in pride, when we're in insecurity that's masking itself as arrogance and trying to pretend that I'm okay, and it's this never enough energy, when that whole never enough thing is going, it shows up in daily interactions as this proving worth, right? If you go back to the people in your founder exit group who are trying to have impact now, I'm going to have big, huge, I'm going to be the biggest impactor in the world.
Oh yeah, I know a lot of those.
That's an energy of proving worth, not providing value.
I also think of the social media posturing.
Yes.
Of
100%.
that whole vibe where it's like the focus is not on delivering transformation to a client or whatever that is. It's on did my shit go viral? Like,
Yes.
that whole thing.
That's why I say the trap of self-promotion as a coach is so dangerous. Until you've gotten to $100 to $300,000 a year as a coach, you shouldn't be doing any self-promotion online at all. Okay? It's counterproductive. There's much, much more efficient ways to build your business that are much more in integrity and much more authentic, that are based around value conversations. They're about talking to people, finding ways of giving tastes of value, finding relationships where you can create value. But the problem is that's scary as shit. It's much, much safer feeling to enable the addiction of self promotion. Oh, well, if I just got viral, then I could be successful. It's chasing this illusion of never enough, never enough, never enough. And even the people who win the game that are, doing 700,000 and netting 100, 150, right? Because the energy's wrong. As opposed to being in the honest question of who can I serve? Who can I create value with? Going deep in that question. Well, what is value? How do I measure it? Who can I help? Who can't I help? Where does that relationship come out of? Okay. That is terrifying, but it's actually very efficient.
Yeah. I mean, you're making me think about my own new business right now, which is in the recruiting space. And it's not a coaching business, right? But I think reflecting upon this, I have been a little bit caught up in the like, we need to get the word out there. Companies need to find out about us, like yada, yada. And, there's positive things that can come of that. Like that's undeniable. But ultimately, I'm in a referral business. I'm in a referrals
100%.
business, right? And it's like coaching all these services businesses, the referrals business, and it's creating wins, creating world-class experiences that really get your grow your flywheel going, right?
Yes.
Not
Well, and close though. So world-class experiences can actually pull you back into proving worth. The issue is having the root here, the antidote is having conversations in your network about value. Like we did a whole bunch of stuff in the systematization of conscious business that we did, Nicole and I, for 15 years. We systematized how you build your business using referral conversations. And it's not something that just happens by giving value, by dumping value on people's heads. It's by having structured conversations about value. It's talking about the elephant in the room, the thing that's too scary, right? Power and value are terrifying things for most people to talk about.
Could you give a concrete example? Like, let's say that I'm starting a new services businesses that a new service. We could just use the coaching example, right? Like, what's the difference between me creating value versus talking about value?
Well, so they go hand in hand, right? But one of the things we say is that value lives in the client, not you. So if you're getting good grades or you're trying to get a job, value lives in you. How good did you do on the test, right? What school did you go to? What's your resume? You. If you're an employee, its value lives in you. If you're a coach or a service provider, value doesn't live in you. It lives in them. It's measured in them. It's defined by them. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. It doesn't matter how humble you are. It doesn't matter how tiled into the secrets of the universe you are. What matters is, who are they? What do they want? What would really have value for them? In the language of the book, what are their yes says hell no goals that scare them so much they're terrified to even talk about them? Okay? Your business, the conscious talent, that's playing with high voltage lines. You're not looking for 10,000 followers. You're looking for 100 courageous people that are stupid and crazy enough to be trying to figure out how to play with high voltage wires with more awareness and consciousness and more power and wealth and investment in the world. They're trying to do both at the same time. And you're trying to pair these crazy ass risk takers that hopefully have good hearts and are trying to do something good in the world together. And if anything, you should have like red flag warning signs on your work. Like the Shackleton ad for North Pole. Hey, looking for people who are probably going to die. I'm not going to pay you. It's going to suck horribly. There'll be glory and fame if we don't die.
I like that. Maybe that'll be the first book I give to everyone the day they join Conscious Talent.
There we go. All right. So your ideal clients are terrified by you because you're inviting them on that hero's journey of development. The fastest path to any heartfelt, any yes, that's hell no goal, anything that's on purpose requires deep interchange. It requires you to do the inner work with the whole inside. So if you're actually helping people create value, that yes, yes, hell no thing, it's going to scare them. So you actually want to slow down and ease off the value creation. You don't want to dump value on people's heads. One of the biggest mistakes service providers make is we try to dump too much value on people's heads. No. Slow it down. Ask questions. Listen to people. A concrete example. I had a friend over, some old friends of ours that we haven't seen in a few years, school, they're friends of our daughters from school, their kids. And so they came over, we had a couple hours with them on Saturday. And Nicole is much better at small talk than I am. I have almost no capacity for it at this point. I'm socially crippled. And so I'm like being the good host, bringing food out and things and trying not to talk because it's all small stuff. And I love them. They're dear friends, but I just can't do it. It's not in me at this point. It's just painful. And so at some point, though, I got in and did a little bit of that. And at the end, just as they're leaving, my friend, dear friend, who I love dearly, actually opened up and asked a question. He shared something vulnerable. He shared something about his business, and not even his business, about a passion project of his he's working on as a way of giving back. And I'm like, that I can talk about. And I asked questions and I listened and I pulled from him. Right? I'm like, there's an energy line coming through him. I could feel it. There's purpose energy coming into his crown chakra, trying to get through him into the world. Right? He just lit up. I felt him light up. I'm like, talk to me about that. And then at the end of that, I said, well, can I give you a couple suggestions, a couple ideas? And I helped him see a couple things that he was off on that is hopefully going to help him go from this direction where he's hitting a different type of wall. He's going the wrong way and get back on course.
So just to replay that back to you. So the value, talking about value was that questioning, right? Getting him talking about why he's passionate about it. What's it going to be, like all of that type of stuff, the vision. And then, you sprinkle on can I offer some reflections at the end?
That's it. Because once he's declared what his value is, and he's told me about the path he's currently on to try to create it, then I ask permission and say, can I offer a couple suggestions on how to achieve your value more efficiently? And if my suggestions land, that creates value.
Makes sense. Well, I think this is like a good transition to talk about, this kind of pure but poor phenomena that can exist when someone is in that kind of spiritual bypass land. The agency is just not there for whatever reason. And it's the way out of it, right? Like what is the way out of it where it's like, basically, I want to build my business with integrity and I don't want to do the douchey things like that I think that I need to do or that the outside world tells me that I should be doing to grow. Like I want to do this and feel great about myself as I do it the whole time.
That's it. Okay. So this actually ties in perfect to that first key. And let's talk about the conscious business trap. Okay. So the conscious business trap, it starts with these 5 stages of development. Again, taking, pleasing, achieving, giving, and receiving. And the fact that when you're in the marketplace, when you're in business, which is a win-lose competitive game, when win-win tries to compete with win-lose, it loses. It drops down to self-sacrifice. This is structural. Okay. Giving works fantastic in parenting. It works horrible in business, but it's a stage thing. You can't just jump from here to here. You naturally, as you start trying to add in consciousness, you go from here to here. and you start getting your ass kicked.
I can relate to this.
Okay. So how do we work with that? This is this poor but pure valley. So we started achieving, then we get stuck in the valley of giving. And we need to get to the other side.
Can I give you a concrete example of this to ground it that's come
Please.
up for me recently? So with the founder satsang community that I run, which I really haven't talked a lot about, but it's basically a kind of a private invite only community for entrepreneurs. It's free, and I've given a shit ton of my time and effort to making this community successful. I've organized retreats. I've been on hundreds of welcome calls. I've helped people out. Like, I've done all of these things. And then at a certain point, I was like, this ain't working for me anymore. Like, I have other things going on. This is like, I've created all these false expectations. Like, all the give, like, hasn't,
That's it.
isn't sustainable. Right.
That's part of pure valley. That's give up.
Yep.
Okay. So you evolved to the giving stage. Congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment. You tried to give and give and give, and you're learning the hard way that raw giving by itself isn't enough. So this
Truth.
picture from coaching to make this concrete, right? This is perfect for this. Okay. This idea that value in coaching or running a group like Founder Satsang, 10% comes from your expertise, your wisdom, your connections, everything you're doing. 30% comes from the tone, the frequency you're holding, the listening you're able to do. Okay. There's a science of listening. We literally can spend years training people on deeper and deeper and deeper levels of listening, as just one example. But 60% comes from client commitment. In our culture, the easiest way to commit is with money. Giving and giving and giving away for free creates a stuckness in the universe where people are the cycles get broken. There's not a flow of water happening. The water's stagnant because you're trying to only push it one way. It has to come in and go out. Okay. I've been coaching for 20 years now. At this point, my minimum coaching fee is $250,000 a year. I do that because my goal is to provide at least $2 to $5 million of value a year. If I'm going to be in a deep committed relationship with someone, I only have a few of those at a time. I only accept somebody if I think it's going to be a good use of my time. And I find, as a scientist with hundreds of thousands of data points over 25 years, that after about 5 to 10x value creation, right? If somebody pays me $250,000, they can absorb, let's call it $1 million or $2 million worth of value before they start freaking out.
What is that? What starts happening that causes them to freak out?
1,000. It doesn't even matter. They don't even have any clue. But it's like people just can't absorb past a certain level. It's much scarier to receive than it is to give. It's terrifying. Terrifying. So if people are getting too much, they start feeling insecure. They feeling nervous. They start questioning the relationship. They buck container. They start skipping calls. They run away in different ways because, and again, if you're insecure and you're proving worth as a coach, you're going to think it was because you didn't provide enough value. But it's actually the opposite. You actually can be providing too much value, and it scares them.
It reminds me of something that I've had to work on with a lot, and has become apparent to me over the past couple of years, which is there's actually a deep discomfort with the capacity to enjoy something.
Mm-hmm.
And so someone saying you're awesome, giving you a compliment, right? That's super unnatural to receive that.
Yes.
Feeling pleasure, weirdly enough, can be super unnatural to just stay in that for a long period of time.
Yes.
Like bliss, even it was very scary to stay in that for a long period of time. And so, yeah, there is a weird reason that our capacity to receive is almost a skill that needs to be built.
That's it. The wall, it's the same wall. The capacity to receive, which is upper limits from Gay Hendricks, the idea that everyone has their limits on how much they can receive. We all do it. Okay. That has to be stretched at the same time you're stretching your leadership. There's a reason, we say 5 stages of leadership. right? Paired with each one. Authentic leadership is the stage of receiving. It's giving and receiving. Of course, you start with that. You climb through the stages, but the limiting factor becomes on your ability to receive, not your ability to give.
Yeah. And I think part of what I've, you know, I don't know where I am on that map or whatever, but I think a big part of the receiving thing is also the recognition of the benevolence of the universe,
Yes,
where it's like when you realize that you are a part of an infinitely abundant universe that actually wants you to have everything, including your highest spiritual evolution, then you actually can be in relationship with it.
that's it. So, and again, the pain. So the universe keeps trying to give us everything we want, but we have to have the ability to turn what we receive into high integrity cycles of giving and receiving.
Now that right there is some wisdom and yeah, just like an amazing imagery for me.
Yes.
And I think yeah, it's kind of like there's a lot of people that talk about like abundance, like it's like it has to be like giving and receiving, kind of like there's like a weird like truth to like tithing, and like you give a
Yeah.
percentage of your income. As your income grows, you keep tithing more and more and more. That's very real. And I think the question would come up for a lot of people, which is like, well, I feel like I'm doing my work. I feel like I know the universe is abundant, but like, dude, I'm still pretty broke, or like, why isn't the money thing taking care of itself yet? And I'm curious how you would respond to that.
Complicated question. So let's actually, so that goes down a whole bunch of pathways, including the question of suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is life difficult? But if I was going to just go super short on this one, and we could spend many hours going down that pathway, I would say if we go back to that picture of the meaning of life, of where are you at, where do you want to be, what's in the way, picture of value creation. Okay, notice in the middle is problems. Solving problems is what gives life meaning and purpose. We think problems are bad. We think the wall is bad. But again, the universe is slowing us down and also giving us opportunities to keep growing. We have a housekeeper who's this wonderful first generation woman from Mexico. She's got these two amazing daughters. One's in college right now as a junior, and her younger daughter is just fantastic. And she is so clean in her energy. She doesn't need more for herself. She just cares that her daughters get to go higher than her. She's devoting her entire life to that.
That's how my wife's parents are Greek immigrants, came from, her dad didn't have electricity in his town. Like, just like, and that was their whole life, is wanting their daughter to have a better life than they had.
That's it. In contrast, a friend who, yeah, an older friend who, the grandfather who made hundreds of millions of dollars, and his grandchildren are crippled from my perspective because they don't have quality problems. They don't have a way to move forward in integrity. They don't have good ladders to climb because, grandpa already gave me $10 million. What do I do with that?
It's
Okay.
it's a really, I mean, it's just something we never think about, the problem of excess, to your point, right?
Yes.
And the meaning drain that can cause. And one thing I would just like to compliment you on is you had in your book a definition of the purpose of life, and it was like growth, contribution, creativity, um, one other thing, and then it was like, and uplifting your consciousness and helping others do the same.
Yes.
Right. And that, to me, I was like, yes, that's it. Like, that hits all the boxes
And,
for my experience, at least.
that point, that's it. It's the cycles of giving and receiving. We're creating meaning and we're receiving. That's the virtuous cycle. That's it. But problems are part of that cycle. The journey of growth is the process of figuring out how to solve problems together. Okay. And that creates value.
Yeah, and it makes it interesting and fun.
Yes.
We would
Your
be
realization, if you had too much money too soon, it wouldn't have worked.
no, it wouldn't have. Or what would have happened is I probably would have became I'm going to build a startup studio, right? And just like done that whole thing and been more interested in, identifying angel investments than seeing the nature of reality, understanding why I am the way that I am, like all the shit that really has created a lot of meaning. And it's been hard as hell, but just like a good workout, right? It's like that feeling after is worth that the feeling of revelation, which I believe is like kind of like my favorite form of currency. It's the most valuable thing to me is revelation, and or at least the thing I enjoy the most. That I would have never been to experience that at so many levels if I was just given a bunch of money, out of the gates, and that's the truth.
That's it. And so perfect timing. So you're just poking now at the second key. And this is the thing just clicked for me in a different way that was so exciting to me. Because I sat with the question, okay, I was like replaying my life and how did I move through the wall in different ways? And if you notice, there are a lot of people who spend a lot of energy trying to get through the wall using healing modalities, using consciousness lifting practices. They're trying to, I mean, a whole industry of self improvement. So we go from no self improvement, I'm just going to climb unconsciously forward up the mountain of success, to, oh, I need to make myself a problem to be fixed. And yet that seems to create even more looping out, more pride, more self focus, more narcissism, Peter Pans that won't grow up, all sorts of stuff. Right. When I had my first burnout, or sorry, second burnout and change directions, my wake up. Okay. My root backstory was I was raised Mormon, very good, loving family, where my entire purpose of life is to breed. If you've ever met Mormons, they're you do not have anything else in life that matters if you're not married and have kids. Like that's it. Entire like my definition of my life path is must breed. Okay. My mom, when I was young, when I was 3 years old, committed suicide. That left a hole inside of me that made me physically incapable of being in a relationship. I couldn't get married. It wasn't possible inside of me. Okay. And then I kept blaming all the women. Well, I just haven't found the one yet. And I tell some of that story in my book. Okay. But, but when I had the wake up experience and I felt the hole and started healing it, and I felt who I was on the other side of that, the love and light that's me, that's you, that's everybody. I'm like, oh, I am clear that what I want in life, and it was true for me, was to be married and have kids. That was a true yes as hell no for me, right? That's everything. And I can't do it. I'm incapable of it. And so I left Silicon Valley for Southern California and journeyed 6 years of whatever I could find, not to fix me. That's the key. I wasn't trying to fix me, I was trying to get to my goal. Okay. So this critical distinction, it's subtle, but it's so profound. It just like shifted so much inside of me. And that's why I'm so excited. Is when we try to push against the wall, it pushes back. And the question is, how do you get pulled through the wall? Okay. So this critical distinction, the second key of pushing against the wall versus being pulled through it. And what pulls us through the wall are yes as hell no goals, plus the support to help address all of the deep, dark, horrible stuff, the holes inside as we do it.
I relate to this a lot because, you know, the theme of my book, called Conscious Accomplishment, How to Use Spiritual Growth, How to Use Personal Achievement for Spiritual Growth, was my own yes, yes, hell no answer to spirituality, because I was very confused about, well, if enlightenment's the most important thing, right? Then like, what the hell is all this business stuff and all these other things? And I had a very polarized mindset. And eventually it clicked that actually like it was moving towards something that created the opportunities for awareness, healing, purification, all that stuff. And so it was like, wait a second, it's like my goals and my business and all the shit that I want to do in my life, it's not against my spiritual progression. It's actually the path that informs it.
As long as your foundational principle is to create value.
Yeah. And I think I didn't relate to it that way. For me, and it might be a similar way of saying something different, is my foundational principle was, or my foundational source of attention was how I was relating to everything along the way.
Okay.
Right. There was
Same thing, different perspective.
yeah, there's kind of this like higher order of like, all right, I know that this business is in service of my spiritual evolution.
Yep.
My spiritual evolution is in service of my creativity. Right. There's
Yep.
just this interplay that's happening. And I just need to keep my eyes on how I'm reacting to everything,
Yes.
and that's going to
Course,
show me my opportunities.
That's it. Okay. So the ladder of consciousness, our being state inside, how we're being in each moment, is a barometer of integrity, which is a barometer of value creation. When we're actually in alignment with the universe, when we're flowing with the river, when we're opening up cycles of giving and receiving, when we're following our soul's path, when we're connecting with purpose lines and using them, when we're in deep, mature, loving relationships, all of these things, we lift in our tone lifts. So you can use the tone as a signal for integrity and value creation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what's so interesting about that is, I mean, you don't find that idea many places. It's so not how we measure value creation today. We measure it very one-dimensionally with money.
Absolutely. And even going back to spirituality. Okay, so if you go back to the Eastern religions and the Western religions, they were both born during a time where intense suffering was automatic and everywhere. It was a time of such profound scarcity that the truths are there, but there's this rude assumption at the heart of Buddhism and Christianity in particular that this plane is bad and heaven is good. Earth is bad, enlightenment is good. I don't believe that that's
This is
true.
an illusion. This is an illusion. That's the
Yes.
other one that can people up.
Right. And there's some truth to that. Again, there's deep wisdom in there, but it's like, what's your root archetypal goal? And if your root archetypal goal is to use power to make the world better, that makes the system work. And again, the Buddhists have it through the Bodhisattva archetype, right? I'm not going to just jump off the planet. I'm going to stay here and live consciousness for everyone. Great. That's value creation. The archetype of Jesus coming back from heaven, sacrificing himself in order to cleanse humanity of original sin. Okay. Darker version of the story, but it's the same notion of how do I serve? How do I help? How do I create value?
Yeah. And I think the way, the tradition that I spent the most time in is really a kind of derivative of Taoism, and that it's, the universe is constantly growing
Yep.
and expanding, and we're aligning to that expansion.
That's
Right.
it.
We're aligning to improve, constantly being this improving of everything around us that we are a part of and is us, and all that whole spiel.
Byron Katie's book on Taoism, on the Tao Te Ching, she titled "A Thousand Names for Joy."
That's beautiful. I have to check that
Yeah.
out.
Okay, so first key was proving worth versus providing value as a measure, an inner compass of noticing when the whole is active and you feel never enough and you're proving worth, versus where you feel clean and clear inside and you're using the overflow to create value in the world. Okay, it's not just what you do; it's how you're being as you do it. Second key was then, are you trying to push against the wall? Are you trying to heal yourself? Are you trying to fix yourself? Or are you finding things that are bigger than you, causes bigger than you, but that are aligned? They're not ego driven. They're a genuine pull. The universe, the Tao is the pull of the river, trying to pull you through the river. And then you have to become bigger and better in order to hold what the universe wants from and for you. Third key then is, are we seeking power, which again is a big word, in the form of more consciousness or more wealth, or any of the forms, right? Are we trying to have more abundance, more consciousness, more, never enough? Or are we finding containers? And this is that first video I did with Tom on Repressed Special and the heart of the spiritual path. That as we grow, there are always places in our consciousness where there's like kinks in the system that we can't figure out on our own. There's always places where the pride and the inner holes are going to distort reality and trick us. And like just the line of guru explosion after guru explosion that we see of people who think they've got it all together. And I was gifted early on by a mentor of mine, Andre Delbecq at the University of Santa Clara, a Jesuit university. And I took a class from him on spirituality and business leadership. And I was an arrogant little twat and started sharing about how more conscious I felt than everybody around me. And he lovingly hit me with a 2x4 and got through to me in such a way that he said, Brian, every single spiritual tradition comes down really hard on the topic of spiritual pride. Okay. You cannot do it yourself. And if you think you're going to be this conscious dude who's more conscious than everybody else, you're screwed. If you think you're going to be the one to heal all the holes inside as you create more impact than anyone else on earth, you're screwed. This work is done in community. It's done in relationship. And so I've spent most of my life finding containers that are bigger than my weaknesses. I'm married to the best of them I've ever found. Nicole has a stronger sense of integrity and awareness of when I'm off than anyone I've ever met. Okay.
So can we define?
Yeah.
I was sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just when you say containers that are more aware or stronger than your weaknesses, I mean, how should we interpret that?
So let me give
what's a
case
practical way to
studies.
think about
I'm
that?
pointing towards something. Like Tom's been poking me to try to get this down to simple definitions, and I'm going to give examples because I'm still working on it. The University of Santa Monica to this day was the best container I've seen. It was a 2-year master's degree in spiritual psychology taught by two of the wisest, most integrated people I've met. And they had their problems and there were limitations in the program and things that it's not like I'm putting them on a pedestal and they were perfect. Strengths come with challenges. But they built a 2-year program where we were 200 of us were highly committed to the container. We were allowing ourselves to be examined at depth, to share authentically in a safe space. And it was a tone of loving. But I'll never forget, I was assisting like a TA in the room the year after I graduated, or second year, whatever, in there. And this guy who was very successful, very charismatic, a very powerful public speaker, got up and was sharing in front of the room in a way that was out of integrity and was seductive. Like he was seducing the room into his story. And Mary Holnick got up and, force of God coming through her, bitch slapped the hell out of him. Like just took a 2x4 to him like nothing I've ever seen. And the whole room was like, oh, mommy got mad. Like everyone was traumatized and trying to figure out what the hell just happened. But he had threatened the container. She wasn't angry at him for him, but he was messing with the room and with the integrity of the energetic container that had been built so carefully for 2 years. And as assistants, they trained us in how to build containers energetically, how to help support the container. I did the 1-year leadership training program they offered one time, and they taught us how they built containers. Like I've spent my life studying that question of how you build strong containers and role modeling after the best people I could find. I don't have a simple answer yet. But at its heart, it's surrendering your will to something. It's allowing yourself to be checked by somebody greater than you in some way, right? The Jesuits do this really well in their tradition. They have really strong structures. The Mormon Church, until you get to the very highest levels, and then there's some problems. But in general, there are actually some really good container building in the Mormon Church that's very powerful. Anywhere where you're submitting yourself to an authority that can call you out.
I love this. One of the core concepts in the lineage that I've spent the most time is they have these like 5 open heart qualities that, you know, you're trying to kind of more consistently embodied. And the last one is this word gongjing, which means reverence for life as it is, but a part of that definition is humility.
Mhm.
And humility is seeing all things as equal. And I've just seen in my experience, like, you know, humility is almost looked at as like a weakness, I think, in our Western society. But on the spiritual path, I mean, it's a superpower.
Right. So in your tradition, what are examples of specific concrete examples of how the structures and support processes that you're engaged in support your humility?
So I don't know if this is intentional or not, but the main teacher, I mean, I don't know that this is a built-in structure, but the main teacher speaks in Chinese only, and there's a translator. And
Okay.
so like there's this like part of my like wanting to get through everything really fast. Like that's like been one of my patterns. And
Nice.
I've gone through the teacher training and it's like
Yes.
so damn slow
Yes.
and like so deliberate and so like long-winded and like just like things that drive the Western mind nuts and the like optimizer personalities. And I'll just never forget when one of my teachers was like, have you ever considered that it's like that intentionally and that he's intentionally leading you on this path to help you see this way you're relating to it right now?
Yes.
And I was like, holy shit, you know? And that's when and she's like, the purpose of a spiritual teacher isn't to get you to an answer as quickly, it's to help you see your shit.
Yes.
And I could see how that was kind of built into some of the way that programming is delivered. And yeah, that's what comes up for me to that question.
Brilliant. So that's a great example. Did you ever so James Fowler, Stages of Faith? Ever see him? Okay. If we go back to the question of suffering, which we had a pin in and we could spend a lot of time in, but um I've been spending some time in on behalf of one of my clients. Our clients right now is going through literally the worst case scenario I could imagine as a parent. I won't go into it, but it's intense. And so I've been holding Nicole and I've been holding for them. And in this question, I'm like, okay, like, these are really good people doing really good stuff. Why do bad things happen to good people? How is this the universe supporting us? And there aren't easy answers. But the thing that I keep coming back to, this is very in line with like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning philosophy, as well as is that faith goes from a naive faith, which is the child's faith, which is spiritual bypass, which is, please God, if I'm a good child, keep mom and dad and me safe. That's the child's prayer. Okay. And at some point, we encounter problems that lead to suffering. And we have to grapple with the question of suffering. And James Fowler said he did stage development research on faith and archetypes of faith and how faith develops. And he said, faith always develops in stages, similar to the 5 stages of development I'm laid out. And it starts in a naive faith and rarely gets to a deep, mature faith. But if it gets to a deep, mature faith, it always goes through suffering. It always goes through grappling with the question of suffering, because it requires surrender at depth to move through. It requires that humility you're pointing at, right? If you use suffering well, you can only use suffering well if you surrender at depth. Right? Does that like
100%.
point to the same?
Yeah, and what I found is that if you're on this consciousness journey, like the universe will push your edge of faith, right? It'll just you'll be able to have a greater capacity for surrender, but you'll have to surrender to harder shit.
Yes.
And that just seems like
And
how
so
it goes.
and then this goes back to this root question. This is one that this is why this container question gets me like I put so much energy into this question, because I believe in the last 30 to 50 years, this is like I'm staking my life on this belief. Like, this is I'm betting my life on this question in terms of what I'm devoting myself to. My belief is that in the last 30 to 50 years, humanity for the first time ever has developed paths for creating mature faith that doesn't require as much suffering. And that's the heart, the genius of the best of what we're seeing, that agentic sage thing. Right now, everybody pretty much I've found that's gone to agentic sage to some level or another did it with immense suffering. Right? I have suffered a great deal in my life and healed a great deal of that suffering, and that's been an inescapable part of my journey. I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old daughter who are two of the brightest lights I've ever met. I want them to get here without as much of this. That's the conversation we're in. Not just for our kids, but for humanity. How does humanity wake up without as much suffering? And I think so much of the suffering up until now has been required as part of faith, and I don't think it's needed.
I want to live in a world where that's true, right?
Yep.
Because like you, I have suffered immensely, and I think there's been this kind of just like concept. I don't know if it's actually true or not. That's popular in spiritual circles, where it's like people that have gone on this consciousness journey early, like you're basically out on the front lines and you're like going through it so that it will be easier for everyone else after you. And part of me gets fired up about that. I'm like, yeah, dude, like, let's fucking go. I think about like the scene in Troy when like Achilles is like first off the boat and he's just like running into, an arrow storm. And I'm like, yeah, I want to be that guy. But at the same time, I'm like, a big part of my suffering, my dad committed suicide too. Like I've been in chronic pain for 5+ years, so much shit. And I'm just like, dude, like, I don't know how many people I know will be able to make it through this if this is what the path that everybody's on. And I'm like, if I'm having to go through this so that it's easier for my daughter. And I know that I'll be creating some trauma, right? But like, if it's like less than like what I had to deal with, like, fuck yeah, like that's a worthy pursuit for me. And I hope the idea is true, right? That it is easier for everybody to get to some of these deeper places of richness without the suffering. And I admire your mission. I just want to say that.
Thank you. And notice again, like what we're talking about with, it's easy to not move on the path. It's easy to try to hang out in naive faith. To be an NPC is much simpler in many ways, right? Or you can sign up for the hero's journey writ large with lots of suffering attached and be on the front lines trying to figure out how to make it easier for those who come behind, but with paths that seem to involve a lot of suffering right now. And again, where's that third choice? How do we work together to take the wisdom that's been created and systematize it, scale it in ways that that can help humanity at large wrestle with that question more effectively.
And so for you, is it those three keys that we broke down? It's just wash, rinse, and repeat those things.
There's a lot else too. There's large stacks of other stuff hiding behind the surface. How do you do conscious business with integrity? Step by step. How do you the authentic leadership stuff we've spent 15 years codifying now, and this is one of the great secrets. So let's call this a fourth key then, which is we talk about going back to poor but pure valley, where you've got achieving, then giving and receiving, or the agentic fool that then becomes spiritual bypass and trying to get to stage. So in reality, what often happens is people have one foot in two places at once. They'll have their giving energy that they use at family, your family compartmentalization, and then their work energy. They'll be an agentic fool at work, and then they'll be more of a benevolent leader at home. And so there's a foot plant here of having one foot as a parent, one foot in entrepreneurship, and then this jujitsu move we do with our clients to get the second foot from capitalism 1.0 to capitalism 2.0, from heroic leadership to authentic leadership. And the practices of authentic leadership, the detailed step-by-step structures of authentic leadership, start with that. Those are bedrock. So proving worth versus providing value. Engaging that question as a community, right? How do we as a community notice each other when we're proving worth? How do we lovingly reflect that back to each other? And then what are the pathways to get to providing value, which is this clean, integrated question of, am I providing value? How can I provide value? Right? That's bedrock. Second one is this shift from trying to push against the wall versus finding goals that are bigger than you that pull you through. That's the genius of a yes, yes, hell no. That's the wisdom of that idea, is that a powerful enough goal will pull you through the wall. And then the third thing is, and then do it in community/container. Find structures, find teachers, find coaches, find communities, find things that you trust more than you trust yourself. Don't rely on yourself. Put yourself in something that's bigger than you.
Well, I think that's a lot. That is a tall order and a lot of homework for people that have been listening, and great advice. And man, I just love talking about this stuff with you. It's just been so much fun, and I'm so grateful and appreciative that you were able to spend this much time with us, sharing your wisdom. And I'll just say, for those listening, I've read Brian's book, Yes, Yes, Hell No. I think that's an amazing place to go for if this conversation touched you. And I would love to offer for you, Brian, where would you direct people who are excited about this and want some more goodness?
Yeah. Yes, this is how now go to corecoaching.com.org. Sorry, corecoaching.org. And there's a page on there for coaches. And I snuck a bunch of videos and podcasts I did with Tom Morgan. I'll put this video there once it's live. There's some other resources. So there's some really good additional resources sort of hidden away on the webpage.
Awesome. We'll link those out. All right, Brian, thanks again, man. This was a real pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for listening.